Why would a millionaire be so stunned when a hotel maid spoke Dutch? Marta lined the corridor with a steady hand and a careful eye. It was a slow hour between breakfast and the midday rush, the kind of quiet that made the old hotel breathe like a clock. The floor smelled faintly of lemon polish and warm coffee, and the curtains in room 3 were still drawn. Marta had worked at the Aurelia for 5 years. She knew every squeak on the 7th stair, every nick on the brass doorknobs, and the rhythm the guests left behind. To them she was small and tidy, a background presence who kept things running. To herself she was a woman with a careful plan and a photograph in her apron pocket that reminded her who she was working for. She kept a small photograph of her brother, folded into the inside pocket of her apron. When the work got heavy and her hands raw, she would press the photo and remember why she wiped tables and fixed towels, why she learned to listen for the sound of a safe being opened or the soft clink of foreign coins. The photo was of an older boy with a crooked smile. He had taught her a few words in Dutch when they had gone away for one hot summer, and the city had smelled of fish and beer and warm bread. She had been 12 then, quick and stubborn, memoizing letters and musical syllables like a child learning to whistle. The Aurelia was the kind of place where worlds crossed. Businessmen waved briefcases and tired tourists stared at maps like prophets. A chandelier hung like a little sun in the lobby, and the manager's office had gold signage and a pen that never stopped rolling. Marta liked it because it kept her moving and because the tips were sometimes generous. She liked that no 2 days were the same. Today she was assigned Suite 7, a long room with a marble bathroom and a balcony that looked over the city park. The room had a smell of cedar and perfume, the kind of smell that holds secrets in its folds. He was a man who carried attention with him. The morning staff whispered when he left the restaurant, and the house staff learned to give him space. He wore a black suit like armor and shoes polished to a mirror. He had a face that looked like it had been carved from magazine pages, sharp cheekbones, a square jaw, and eyes that measured people fast. He had a voice that could be gentle and cold at once, the way a colleague remembers a precise machine. They called him Mr. Van Buren when they talked behind closed doors. He had an air that made people assume he needed nothing except a good chair and uninterrupted time to think. She knocked and pushed the door gently. The room smelled of cedar and a faint, expensive cologne. The bed was made to hotel perfection. Towels folded like origami. She moved through the room with practiced care, checking the minibar, wiping a faint smudge from the desk, refreshing the water glass. Then the phone rang. It was a small thing at first, an ordinary ring, but the way the device vibrated on the nightstand suggested urgency. Marta picked up the phone as part of the routine, pressing a speaker button with a thumb, used to quick wipe. She expected a guest request or call for more towels. She did not expect an English voice with precise vowels. She did not expect the name to be Dutch and the accent to match the words her brother had once taught her. But there it was. The voice on the line was not asking for room service or a second pillow. It spoke with a calm that made the syllables land like stones. "Good morgen," she said, and the word left her mouth like a small theft. It sounded smaller even to her ears, a thing she kept between her teeth and the phone. It meant nothing immediate to the guests who passed the corridor. It meant everything to the man in the suit who had been standing behind the partially closed curtains, listening. She closed the bathroom door and finished her work, her fingers moving by habit. Outside, the millionaire paused with his hand on the doorknob. He had been about to leave for a meeting, his day mapped by minutes and polite demands. The sound he had caught made him stop. The words surfaced, unexpected and exact, the sound of a childhood hallway and cross-channel ferries. It pulled on him like a thread through old cloth. The phone call was short. Marta answered in a few calm words, information about the suite, a clarification about a meeting, a patient explanation about the towels. The caller said something she did not fully understand, and she asked for clarity in Dutch, soft and sure. They agreed on a time and a detail. It was ordinary. It was not an extraordinary moment to anyone listening. But for Mr. Van Buren it struck like a bell. He stepped closer to the door when she hung up. Seeing her fold the towel the way her mother had taught her, he noticed the small photograph peeking from the fold of her apron. He saw her hands, work-hardened but gentle. He recalled the Dutch syllables he had heard on the docks in his youth, the smell of fried fish and someone calling across a quay. He felt something old and soft in him move, and curiosity that had not been pleased in years began to scratch. Curiosity is a dangerous thing in an empty room. It pushes the quiet away and asks questions with its mouth. Mr. Van Buren knocked once and waited. Marta's heart quickened, not because she was frightened, but because attention from someone like him felt like wind on a glass bottle, fragile and carrying a sound she could not fully read. She opened the door and looked at him. Up close, he was not as perfect as his distant image. His jaw was set a little too tight, his eyes a color of winter river stone, and the lines around his mouth told of many decisions made in private. "Excuse me," he said in English, his voice still clipped. "You spoke Dutch on the phone?" She nodded. "Yes, sir. Her mouth searched for a phrase. "I speak some Dutch." He studied her as if she were an unfamiliar painting. "Where did you learn it?" "In Rotterdam," Marta said. She did not add the details of a summer and a boy who taught her by the docks. The manager had told them not to overshare with guests. Curiosity pressed again on Mr. Van Buren's face. He had not expected an answer that small and truthful. May I ask you to come with me for a moment?" he said. There were rules for the staff. There were polite refusals and scripted responses. You did not follow guests into corridors without permission. Marta's training told her to be careful. The manager's voice echoed in the back of her mind. Always get permission. Never take personal calls in occupied suites. Never meet a guest alone if the situation feels off. But he was Mr. Van Buren. He had a tone that could both order and ask, as if asking were currency he could spend. He smiled then, brief and almost apologetic, and it made the request feel less like a command and more like an invitation. "All right," she said. She folded the towel and clipped the corner. She walked down the hall with him, watching his shoes tap steady as a metronome. They moved into the small staff elevator and rode down in a quiet made of shared silence. In the lobby, the doorman tipped his cap, and the world opened into the morning like a polished coin. He led her to a small parlor in the back of the hotel that was rarely used by guests. The walls held old photographs of the city and the lighting was soft. 2 cups of coffee sat steaming on a low table, placed there by an assistant who bowed away like someone leaving an altar. Marta sat facing him, her hands folded in her lap. Her palms were rough and her nails trimmed short from work. She felt out of place in a room that smelled faintly of chrysanthemums and money. He waited. When he finally spoke, his voice had the edge of something that had been kept too long. Memory, perhaps, or regret. "My mother spoke Dutch," he said. He paused, measuring the sound. "She left when I was small. I lived a long time abroad. I had not heard the language for years. Your voice, your word, pulled something up from inside me." Marta listened. She had crossed enough rooms in hotels to collect small confessions into the bucket of what she would call her life. People told her things in passing. A secret about a marriage, a detail about a business deal, a laugh that hid fear. But this was different. This was not a secret to be delivered into a trash bin. This was an ache contained in a man who had learned to hold everything in. "Why did you come to the Netherlands?" he asked, not as a question about her, but about his own history. He asked with a softness that surprised her. The way he moved his hands suggested a man trying to hold on to a memory that slipped like oil. She told him the short version. A childhood with a brother, a summer, a language learned in laughter, a family that returned and left the words like a small treasure. She kept the sentences plain and honest. He listened as if she were telling the story of a small bird. He asked questions that were careful, not cruel. He wanted to know the name of the harbor, the street where she had bought a warm baguette, as if the city were a map he could navigate with his mouth. "This is a strange thing," he said finally. "I have lived with deals and numbers. I have bought buildings and sold them for more than the city can imagine. I have an account for every face. But language is an account I broke long ago." The voice in this room suggested there was something unspent. Marta felt the truth of his words. There are things that money cannot buy, and among them are the soft bridges back to childhood. She had known this herself when she held her brother's photograph. He had avoided those bridges, buying time with movement and with projects. Sitting there, his hands curled around the coffee cup, he looked small in the way that people look when they remember that they were once a child who needed someone to say a word and understand. He confessed, with a bluntness that was almost shy, that he had come to the city to settle a piece of his past. He had been searching for a woman who had worked in a small kitchen decades ago. He remembered language and the way she had hummed while she stirred a pot. He had tried to find her through records, letters, and a series of careless leads. He had never found her. He had come back to close a circle he had left open. Marta listened, and then she told him a story of her own, not large, not dramatic, but honest. She told him about a summer and an old man on the quay who taught her a song. She told him about her brother stealing coins to buy candy and the way the sea smelled like salt and apples. She told him of the ache of leaving and the way English sometimes made sentences feel like shoes twice too small. When she spoke, he closed his eyes as if tasting something. He asked a small question about her brother and the photograph. She told him he lived 3 neighborhoods over and that she sent money when she could. He nodded, and the nod was not the nod of a man who dismisses. It was a nod of someone who keeps tally of small truths. Then he did something that surprised her. He reached into his pocket and took out an envelope, plain, white, and unadorned. Inside was a letter and a small photograph. The photograph was old, edges soft, and the colors faded. It showed a woman in a plain dress, smiling as if at a joke. She had a child in her lap, and there were crates of fish in the background. Marta's breath stalled when she saw it. The face was familiar in a way that made her chest tighten. It was the face of the woman who had hummed a song into her ear years before. "This is the woman I have been looking for," he said. "She saved me from a life that might have been narrow. I owe her my chances. I never thanked her properly. I thought I had lost her." Marta felt a strange heat and cool at once. She had not expected to be the bridge between 2 histories. She had not expected a photograph to fall from the sky into her lap like a coin. She listened as if the room were a bowl catching small stones of truth. The millionaire explained how the woman had once worked at a fish stall by the quay, and how the scent of herring and hot oil had attached itself to the sound of his mother's laugh. He told her the story of a child who grew into a man who bought buildings and learned to count kindness by the ledger. She told him the name she had heard from her brother's lessons. She said the words slowly, drawn like a map. When he heard the syllables, his face changed. It was a small loosen of muscle, a softening like ice thawing at the edges. He asked where she had learned it. She told him about Rotterdam and a summer of small work and languages learned by the thread of need. He leaned forward, as if trying to catch a scent. "Would you help me?" he asked. It was a request that bent toward the impossible and the ordinary at once. For a man who had everything, the thing he wanted most was an answer he could not buy. Marta hesitated. Help could mean many things. It could mean a signature on a paper. It could mean a favor that asked too much. It could mean a kindness that made her uncomfortable. She thought of her brother and the rent bills stacked like ships. She thought of the envelope in his hand and how it had weighed her small hopes. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. "Tell me the street names you remember. Tell me any small detail. A shop, a face, a line from a song she might have hummed. Anything that might lead to where she went after Rotterdam." His voice was careful. "And if you would you come with me to the quay? I want to see the place where she stood. I want to stand where she stood and perhaps understand what she saw." Marta's world was a balance of small risks and larger needs. She could refuse. She could say the rules forbade it. She could say no and return to the rooms, to the steady certainty of cleaning and folding. But the photograph had opened something like a window. There was a pool that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the way a small story could bend 2 lives together. She thought of the quay, the smell of frying fish, and the crooked smile of the boy in her pocket photo. She thought of the woman in the grainy snapshot, and how a single memory could hold a life. "All right," she said finally. "I will come, but only for a short time." He agreed, grateful and almost relieved. They arranged the time. She finished a shift and changed out of her apron, tying her hair back longer than usual. The city on that day was bright, with a wind that smelled like the sea even though the search would take them to older docks. She met him at the back entrance, and they walked together toward the river, the millionaire and the maid, a strange pair moving through a city that had never thought to connect them. People looked at them, some with curiosity and some with nothing at all. They walked past markets where fish lay on stalls like silver promises, past warehouses with names stamped in faded paint. Marta pointed to where a bakery had once stood, to where a small barber had cut hair for a loaf of bread. She spoke in the spare way that told only what needed to be known. He listened and wrote a few notes on a small pad, his handwriting small and careful as a man's habit. At the quay, the air was different. The sound of gulls cut the sky into pieces and the boards smelled of salt and wet rope. The vendor stalls had changed hands and the buildings had been repainted a dozen times, but the bones of the place remained. He stood where she said the woman had once worked. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine a younger face leaning over a pan of frying fish, or a woman laughing as she wrapped a child's small shoes. He tried to feel the smell in his throat and the shape of a place that had given him a name. An old man on the quay watched them with the friendliest eyes. He remembered many people and had an appetite for small stories. When Mata mentioned the woman's name, the old man's face lit, and he called to someone across the stall. A line of conversation like fish heads and spices started to knit a net. It was small at first, 2 people here, a name there. But it grew like a pattern until someone produced a scrap of paper with an address, and another person remembered a house with a blue door. The key gathered memory like driftwood. They followed the threads to a narrow lane with a painted blue door. The paint flaked like old skin, and the number plaque almost detached itself in the rain. He stood there, proud and awkward at once. He had his driver waiting down the street and his phone full of appointments, but none of that mattered when they knocked. A woman with hair like coal opened the door. She had the same set of cheekbones, the same quick laugh that bent her mouth when she smiled. Her hands were folded like someone still used to working. They spoke in a mix of tongues at first, then settled into Dutch when the woman recognized the sound as something close to home. She listened, then laughed, then cried in a small way like someone who had been given a found thing. There were tears and an old photograph that matched the one he kept in his coat pocket. He apologized, clumsy with his wealth and his regret, and she waved it away like a small wind. It was not a cinematic reunion with music and raised banners. It was a room with worn wallpaper and a kettle that hummed. There was coffee and bread and an old story that spilled out like a small river. The woman had lived a life of odd jobs and small joys. She had children and lost a husband to a fever. She had never expected letters from a child who had left with a promise to return. She had kept her work and her songs close because they were proof that she had been seen. Marta watched as the millionaire and the woman exchanged names like keys. There was a softness in him she had not known was possible. She felt like someone who had helped put a small rite in motion. Her work had been to keep rooms clean, but today she had been a clean surface for truth to land on. The woman invited them to sit and fed them small cakes like a mother might feed 2 lost boys. They ate and spoke until the light boiled down to the color of coins. Afterwards, the millionaire turned to Marta and offered her money, a check with a number that made her breath catch. She felt the weight of it in her hands as if it did not belong to her. He wanted to repay her for the help, for the small bridge she built with a few words and a willingness to walk with him. He wanted to gift her a sum that might clear debt or pay school fees or allow her brother a small chance. But Marta shook her head. "Keep it," she said, the words easy and not entirely rude. "Take care of her. Make sure she is comfortable. Give the woman what she needs." He insisted, because he had habits of investing and gifting and because in his world problems had numbers and receipts. She insisted with a stubbornness he had not planned for. Finally, they agreed on something in the middle, a small payment to settle immediate needs and a promise to check in. He would help arrange a cleaner for the woman's home, he promised, and he would pay for her son's schooling. He would call it charity if that made the paperwork easier. He would also write the woman a letter explaining what he had meant to say for years and to ask permission to visit when it was wanted. They walked back to the Aurelia in silence that had the shape of something new. The city seemed fuller now, as if the words they had spoken had plugged up small holes in the map. Marta felt a quiet pride like someone who had kept a safe key in her pocket for years and found it opened a door. The millionaire felt like a man who had uncovered an old map and found it led to a place he had always wanted to see. In the days that followed, life at the hotel returned to its ordinary rhythms. Marta made beds and folded towels and kept the small photograph hidden in her apron. The millionaire left the city for a time with promises and letters in his pocket. He called sometimes and sent a message asking about the woman and her health. They never became friends in the way that 2 people who share a long past do. He remained a man with houses and meetings and a calendar that bit into his days. She remained a woman who rose early and counted coins and learned the names of guests by voice and gait. Once, he stopped by the hotel with a small envelope for the woman's son. He handed it to Marta with a shy apology and a thank you that felt like a rare coin. She accepted it with 2 hands and a small smile. No one at the Aurelia knew the full story. It floated like a quiet thing between them, a rumor that had an honest origin. The photograph in Marta's apron kept a place like a talisman. She would sometimes take it out in the night when the city was soft and count small blessings, a roof over her head, work that kept her steady, a brother who waited, and the knowledge that a word spoken years ago had changed a life not by grand gestures but by simple insistence. Curiosity had pushed them both into an afternoon that neither had planned. For him it had been a search to repay a debt. For her it had been a small adventure that bent the ordinary into something meaningful. They had both been surprised by how small truths could rearrange the loud things in a life. It was not a story of sudden fortune, but of a connection that paid its own quiet dividend. Marta continued to sweep, always aware that one small word can carry a continent with it. She kept the apron photo and sometimes hummed a little song she had learned on a key. The millionaire bought a bouquet and left it at the woman's door once because he had promised himself he would. It shone there like a private sun for a short while, then faded into the ordinary care of neighborly acts. When guests asked about the city, Marta gave simple directions, careful to keep the stories small and true. She liked to think that her life had not changed in the large ways the papers might enjoy, but she knew better. It had changed in a way that mattered. The world was a map of small kindnesses, she believed, and one day of courage had rewired a map for two people. Why would a millionaire be so stunned when a hotel maid spoke Dutch? Because language is a map to a home, and sometimes a single word can find the place where a debt of gratitude sits waiting to be paid. And because, in the end, the richest things in life are not always counted in banknotes but in the quiet ease of being seen. If this story touched your heart and you'd like to discover more incredible tales of unexpected connections and life-changing encounters, don't forget to subscribe to the Beyond Yesterday YouTube channel. Every story we share reminds us that the most extraordinary moments often come disguised as ordinary days, and that family isn't just about blood. It's about the love we choose to share across any distance.